Sometimes broken souls find exactly what they need when they stop looking. Wes Dalton was a lonely widower, riding fence lines in Texas with only his old donkey for company. One evening, Maude stopped at a hollow oak and refused to move. Inside, wrapped in burlap and barely breathing, was an abandoned newborn baby. No note, no explanation. Wes hadn't held a child since burying his daughter decades ago. Now he had a second chance he never asked for. But someone left that baby for a reason. Would this forgotten cowboy find redemption, or would the secrets destroy them both? Before we jump back in, I'd really love to know where you're tuning in from today. And if this heartfelt story truly touches you, please make sure you're subscribed to this channel right now, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special just for you. The sun rose over Cottonwood Creek the way it always did. Slow and deliberate, painting the Texas sky in shades of amber and rust. Wes Dalton watched it from his porch, coffee mug warming his calloused hands, the steam curling up into the cool morning air. 68 years on this earth had taught him that sunrises were reliable when little else was. The land around his ranch told a different story, a story of slow surrender. The forest that had once stretched dense and green for miles now stood skeletal in places, drought-ravaged oaks reaching toward a sky that refused to offer rain. Cottonwood Creek itself had dwindled to a thread of water, barely enough to sustain the wildlife that depended on it. But Wes had learned to live with diminishment. He'd been doing it for 20 years. His wedding band caught the light as he lifted the mug to his lips. The gold had worn thin, smoothed by decades of wear, but he'd never taken it off. Not when Sarah died, not when the house became too quiet, not when well-meaning neighbors suggested it might be time. The ring was a promise he'd made before God and man, and Wes Dalton kept his promises, even to ghosts. "Morning, Maude," he called out, and from the small corral beside the barn came an answering bray that sounded more like complaint than greeting. The donkey had opinions about everything, especially the quality of her hay and the timing of their daily patrols. She was 16 years old, gray around the muzzle, stubborn as a rusted bolt, and the closest thing to family Wes had left. He finished his coffee and set the mug on the porch rail, then walked down the worn wooden steps. His boots kicked up dust with each step. Everything here was covered in dust lately. The drought had been going on for 3 years now, and folks in town talked about selling out, moving somewhere the land still had life in it. But Wes had nowhere else to go. This ranch was where he'd brought Sarah as a bride, where they'd raised Emma for those precious few years before the accident. Leaving would be like abandoning them all over again. Inside the barn, he grabbed Maude's tack, the leather soft and well-oiled from years of care. Some men let their equipment go to hell when they lived alone, but Wes maintained everything with the same precision he'd learned in the military. Vietnam had taught him that sloppy habits got people killed, and though he'd left that war 40-odd years behind, certain lessons had carved themselves deep. "Hold still now," he murmured as he settled the saddle pad on Maude's back. She shifted, deliberately stepping on his boot. "I know you're not ready." "I wasn't asking your opinion." The donkey's ears flicked back, but she allowed him to finish tacking up. Their relationship worked because they understood each other, both old, both ornery, both resigned to keeping each other company because the alternative was worse. The ranch house stood behind them, a modest 2-bedroom structure that Sarah had filled with curtains and photographs and laughter. Now the curtains hung faded, and the photographs gathered dust, and the laughter had been silent for so long, Wes sometimes wondered if he'd imagined it. He kept the place clean. He wasn't going to live like an animal, but clean wasn't the same as lived in. The kitchen table sat empty. The 2nd-bedroom door stayed closed. And at night, the creaking of the house settling sounded too much like loneliness for him to bear. He swung himself into the saddle, his joints protesting more than they used to. 68 wasn't old exactly, but it wasn't young either, and the years of ranch work had taken their toll. Still, he could ride fence line and check traps and handle himself in rough country better than men half his age. The body aged, but skills endured. They headed out along the familiar route, following the fence that marked the northeastern boundary of his property. Beyond it lay state forest land, most of it neglected and overgrown. The Forest Service didn't have the budget to maintain it properly, and the result was a tangle of deadfall and scrub that harbored coyotes, wild hogs, and occasionally something more troublesome. Wes supplemented his social security by trapping varmints for neighboring ranches, coyotes mostly, sometimes a bobcat or a pack of feral dogs. It wasn't much money, but it kept him occupied and gave him a reason to get up in the morning. Maude picked her way through the underbrush with the confidence of long practice. They'd been riding this route for years, checking on things, making sure the fence hadn't been knocked down by wildlife or weather. The land rose and fell in gentle swells, once green pastures now brown and brittle. In the distance, he could see the Garrett property, though it had been abandoned for the better part of a year. The Garretts had been third-generation ranchers, but when old Cal Garrett died, his kids had sold everything to a developer and moved to Dallas. The developer's plans had fallen through when the economy tanked, and now the place just sat there, windows boarded up, slowly returning to the earth. Wes didn't mind the solitude. Truth be told, he preferred it. After Sarah died, cancer, slow and cruel, he discovered that sympathy had a shelf life. People brought casseroles for a month, checked in for maybe 6 months, and then life moved on, and you were expected to move on with it. But Wes hadn't moved on. He'd just moved inward, pulling himself into a smaller and smaller space until most days he could go without speaking to another human being at all. Doc Brennan was the exception. Travis Brennan had been the town veterinarian for 40 years before retiring, and he lived 3 miles down the road in a house even smaller than Wes's. They'd known each other since Vietnam. Doc had been a field medic in the same company, and they'd developed the kind of friendship that didn't require much talking. Once a week, Doc would drive out with a 6-pack of beer, and they'd sit on Wes's porch and watch the sun go down. Sometimes they'd discuss the Astros or complain about Washington. Mostly they'd just sit, and that was enough. Sheriff Clayton Moss checked in on Wes from time to time too, though their friendship was more complicated. Clayton had been Emma's godfather. He'd been the one to respond to the call about the accident 22 years ago, had been the one to tell Wes and Sarah that their 7-year-old daughter had drowned in the creek during a flash flood. Clayton had carried that guilt ever since, as if being sheriff meant he should have been able to prevent an act of God. Wes had forgiven him. There was nothing to forgive. But Clayton kept coming around anyway, making sure Wes was all right, probably feeling like he owed some kind of perpetual debt. The day warmed as they rode, the sun climbing higher, insects beginning their afternoon chorus in the brush. Wes checked each section of fence, his practiced eye noting where posts had shifted or wire had come loose. He'd fix it tomorrow, no point carrying tools today. The traps he'd set 3 days ago were empty, except for one that held a half-eaten possum, probably killed by something bigger that had stolen most of the meat. He reset the trap and moved on. By noon, they'd reached the northeastern corner, where his property line met the state forest at the base of a small rise. This was the part of the route Wes liked best, where the trees grew closer together and the ground stayed shaded and almost cool. An old creek bed ran through here, mostly dry now but still holding pockets of water in the deeper spots. Wildlife congregated here, deer, turkey, even the occasional black bear passing through. He dismounted and let Maude drink from one of the pools while he ate his lunch, simple fare of jerky and an apple. The forest was quiet around him, just the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a crow. This was the kind of peace Wes had learned to appreciate. No demands, no expectations, no one asking how he was doing or whether he'd thought about dating again or suggesting he might be happier in one of those senior communities. Just a man, a donkey, and the slowly dying land. He thought about Sarah sometimes, wondered what she'd make of him now. She'd been the optimistic one, always seeing the potential in things, always believing the next season would be better. When Emma died, it had broken something fundamental in her, but she'd still tried to smile, tried to plan for a future, tried to convince Wes they could have another child. He'd been the one to refuse, too afraid of losing someone else, too convinced that loving meant suffering. Maybe if he'd been braver, Sarah would have had something to hold on to. Maybe she would have fought the cancer harder if there'd been a reason beyond just him. The wedding band caught his eye again, glinting in a shaft of sunlight. He twisted it absently, the gesture so familiar he barely noticed doing it anymore. Some men took their rings off when they worked, afraid of losing them or catching them on equipment. Wes had never worried about that. If the ring came off, it meant he was dead, and at that point it wouldn't matter much anyway. "Come on, girl," he said, hauling himself back into the saddle. "We've got 3 more miles before we're done." They continued along the fence line, the afternoon stretching long and drowsy. This was Wes's life now, routine, predictable, manageable. No surprises, no shocks, no sudden losses that could tear him apart. He'd built walls carefully over the years, and he intended to keep them standing until his heart gave out or his luck ran dry, whichever came first. But the land had other plans. As they rounded a bend where an ancient oak marked the corner of his property, Maude suddenly stopped. Not her usual obstinate stop where she simply decided she'd had enough, but a full freeze, ears forward, body tense. "What is it?" Wes asked, scanning the tree line. Sometimes she spooked at a snake or caught scent of a predator. But she wasn't looking around. She was staring directly at the base of the oak. He dismounted, hand instinctively moving toward the rifle in his saddle scabbard. The oak was old, maybe 200 years, its trunk thick and gnarled. He'd passed it thousands of times, knew every twisted branch and hollow. But something was different today. The hollow at the base of the tree, the one he'd always assumed went back maybe a foot or two, seemed to be moving, not the branches swaying in wind. The hollow itself, as if something inside it was pulsing, shifting, alive. Maude brayed, a sharp sound of alarm that sent birds scattering from nearby trees. Wes drew the rifle and approached slowly. Every sense heightened the way it used to be in the jungle, when you knew something was wrong, but couldn't see it yet. The movement continued, slight but unmistakable. Not an animal, he thought. The rhythm was wrong. Too slow, too. He knelt beside the hollow and peered inside. For a moment his mind refused to process what he was seeing. Then recognition hit like a physical blow, driving the breath from his lungs and sending his heart into his throat. Wrapped in what looked like old burlap, barely bigger than a loaf of bread, was a baby. A newborn from the look of it, skin pale, lips faintly blue. The movement he'd seen was the rise and fall of its chest, shallow, labored, but there. Still breathing, still alive, the rifle fell from Wes's hands. He reached into the hollow with trembling fingers, every instinct screaming that this couldn't be real, couldn't be happening, couldn't be anything but some cruel hallucination, brought on by too much sun and too much solitude. But the baby was solid, real, fragile, and cold and real. He pulled her free. He could tell it was a girl from the brief glimpse of her tiny form, and cradled her against his chest. She barely responded, no cry, no squirm, just that faint breathing that sounded like it might stop at any moment. "Jesus," Wes whispered. And for the first time in 20 years, it sounded like a prayer. Training took over where thought failed. Wes stripped off his jacket and wrapped the baby in it, then pressed her against his chest, trying to share what warmth his body could offer. Her skin felt like ice, her breathing so shallow he had to focus to detect it at all. Hypothermia, he knew. Probably dehydration. Maybe worse things he couldn't identify. "We're going," he said to Maude, his voice rough. He shoved the rifle back in its scabbard and mounted awkwardly, cradling the baby with one arm while gathering the reins with the other. "Fast as you can manage." For once the donkey didn't argue. She must have sensed the urgency, or maybe she just responded to the tone in his voice. Either way, she moved out at the fastest pace she could sustain, picking her way through the underbrush toward the main trail. Doc Brennan's place was 3 miles south. Wes's ranch was 6. Doc's was closer, and more importantly, Doc knew medicine. He'd saved more animals than Wes could count, had talked Wes through setting his own broken arm 5 years back when he'd fallen from a ladder. If anyone could stabilize a dying infant, it was Travis Brennan. The ride felt endless. Every few seconds, Wes checked to make sure the baby was still breathing. Terrified, he'd look down and find her gone. She didn't cry. That worried him more than anything. Newborns were supposed to cry, weren't they? That's what they did. Announced themselves, demanded attention, made sure you knew they were alive. This baby just lay there, silent and still, as if she'd already learned that crying wouldn't bring help. The burlap she'd been wrapped in smelled of earth and something else. Something faintly chemical that Wes couldn't place. It was rough, stained, the kind of cloth you'd use to cover equipment or wrap tools, not to swaddle a child. Whoever had left her in that tree hadn't cared about comfort. They'd cared about hiding her. Questions hammered at him as Maude carried them through the fading afternoon light. Who leaves a baby in a tree? Why not drop her at a hospital, a fire station, somewhere she'd be found immediately? How long had she been there? And the question that scared him most, was someone coming back for her? Or had they left her there to die? Doc's house came into view, a single-story ranch with a detached clinic building he'd converted from an old garage. Wes half fell from the saddle, his legs unsteady, and stumbled toward the front door. He hammered on it with his free hand. "Travis, open up!" The door swung open, and Doc stood there, glasses pushed up on his forehead, wearing the cardigan he always wore around the house. He started to smile, then saw what Wes was holding. "Lord Almighty," Doc breathed. "Get her inside. Clinic now." They moved through the house to the clinic, where Doc's examination table still stood alongside shelves of medical supplies. Doc had officially retired, but half the county still brought him sick animals. And he'd kept enough equipment to handle emergencies. "Put her down here." "Gentle," Doc said, already pulling on gloves and grabbing supplies. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, unwrapping the burlap, examining the tiny body beneath. "She's hypothermic. Severely dehydrated. Wes, hand me that warming blanket from the cabinet." Wes did as instructed, watching Doc work with the focused intensity he remembered from the war. Lives hung by threads back then, and Doc had been the one who tied the knots that held them together. He was doing it again now, checking the baby's vital signs, listening to her heart and lungs, assessing her with the kind of systematic care that gave Wes something to hold on to. "She's maybe 3 days old," Doc said after a few minutes. "Cord's been cut, but not professionally. No sign of serious injury, but she's in bad shape. Another few hours, and we'd be having a different conversation." He looked up at Wes. "Where'd you find her?" "The hollow oak. North boundary of my property. Wrapped in that burlap, tucked back in the hollow like someone was trying to hide her." Doc's jaw tightened. "We need to call Clayton." "This is a criminal matter." "I know," Wes said. But even as he agreed, something in him resisted. The moment they called the sheriff, this stopped being about saving a baby and started being about investigations and procedures and systems. He understood the necessity, but it felt like a betrayal somehow. Doc seemed to read his thoughts. "She needs more help than I can give her, Wes. I can stabilize her, but she needs a hospital, real doctors, proper equipment. Will she make it?" "I think so. She's a fighter, this one. Wouldn't have lasted this long otherwise." Doc finished wrapping the baby in the warming blanket and set up an IV line with practiced ease. "I'm going to give her fluids, get her temperature up. Then we'll see about transport." Wes nodded, unable to take his eyes off the small form on the table. She looked impossibly fragile, all tiny fingers and translucent skin. Her face was scrunched, almost angry, as if she were furious at the world for treating her this way. He didn't blame her. Doc made the call to Sheriff Moss while monitoring the baby's vitals. Within 20 minutes, Clayton's cruiser pulled into the driveway, lights off, but moving fast. The sheriff was a big man, 6'3" and solid, with grey hair and a weathered face that had seen too much of humanity's worst. He took one look at the baby, and his expression went carefully neutral. "Start from the beginning," he said to Wes. Wes told him everything. The strange movement in the tree, Maude's reaction, the discovery, the ride to Doc's. Clayton took notes, asked questions, examined the burlap wrapping with gloved hands. "No note, no identification, nothing?" Clayton asked. "Just her and the burlap? I'll need to see the site. Get a team out there, process it properly." Clayton looked at the baby, something sad moving behind his eyes. Someone went to significant effort to hide her. That means they either didn't want her found at all, or they were afraid of who might find her, or they were coming back, Doc added quietly. Left her there temporarily, meant to retrieve her later. The three men stood in silence, each contemplating the implications. If someone had hidden the baby intending to return, they'd be looking for her. And when they discovered she was gone, they might come looking for whoever had taken her. I'll run this through every database we have, Clayton said. Missing persons, abandoned infants, recent births at area hospitals. But I'll be honest, if someone wanted to keep this baby off the books, they probably succeeded. He paused. She needs to go to Child Protective Services. They'll place her in emergency foster care until we can figure out what's going on. How long will that take? The question came out before Wes could stop it. Clayton's expression softened. Could be days, could be weeks. Depends what we find. He hesitated. Are you thinking about volunteering as emergency placement? I don't know what I'm thinking, Wes admitted. But she's been through enough. Shuffling her around to strangers seems cruel. Wes, Doc said carefully, you haven't taken care of an infant in over 20 years. This is a big responsibility. I know that. He did know it. Knew it was probably a terrible idea. Knew he was too old and too isolated and too damaged to be caring for anyone, let alone a helpless baby. But when he looked at her lying there, he felt something he hadn't felt in 2 decades, a pull toward another human being, a sense that maybe his life wasn't quite finished after all. Clayton studied him for a long moment. I'll make some calls. ZPS will want to do a home visit. Make sure your place is suitable. No guarantees, Wes, but if you're serious about this, I am. The words surprised him, almost as much as they seemed to surprise Clayton and Doc. But once spoken, they felt true. He couldn't explain it, didn't fully understand it himself. But this baby had been left in a tree on his land, and somehow that made her his responsibility. He'd failed to protect Emma. He wouldn't fail this time. Doc kept the baby overnight for observation, setting Wes up in the spare room so he could be nearby. Neither of them slept much. Wes lay in the dark, listening to the clinic monitor beeping steadily through the wall, proof that the baby's heart kept beating. Around 3 a.m, she finally made a sound, not a cry exactly, but a small mewling whimper that pierced straight through his chest. He was on his feet and in the clinic before he realized he'd moved. Doc was already there, adjusting the IV, checking her temperature. She's doing better, Doc said. Temp's almost normal. Vitals are stabilizing. He looked at Wes standing in the doorway in his undershirt and jeans, and something knowing moved across his face. You can hold her if you want. Might do you both some good. Wes approached slowly, as if sudden movement might shatter the moment. Doc showed him how to support her head, how to cradle her small weight. She was so light, barely there at all. But when he settled her against his chest, she made another small sound and seemed to relax, her breathing evening out. Hello there, Wes whispered, and his voice broke on the words. I've got you now. You're safe. He stood there in Doc's clinic, holding an abandoned baby whose name he didn't know, whose history was a mystery, whose future was uncertain. And for the first time since Sarah died, Wes Dalton felt like he might have a reason to keep living. The Child Protective Services evaluation happened faster than Wes expected. A tired-looking woman named Patricia Whitmore drove out to the ranch 2 days after the discovery, clipboard in hand, eyes that had seen too many bad situations. She walked through the house making notes, asked questions about his income and health, examined the spare bedroom he'd hastily cleaned. It's quiet out here, she observed, looking out the window at the empty landscape. Yes, ma'am, isolated. I prefer it that way. She studied him for a moment, then glanced at the baby, sleeping in a borrowed bassinet Doc had provided. She seems content. Doc Brennan speaks highly of you. Says you were steady in the emergency, did everything right. I just brought her to someone who knew what to do. That's more than some people manage. Patricia made a final note. I'm approving temporary emergency placement. We'll reassess in 2 weeks. You'll need supplies, formula, diapers, proper sleeping arrangements. There's a list of required items. Doc mentioned he'd help you get set up. Yes, ma'am. We're going into town this afternoon. After she left, Wes stood in the kitchen, feeling the weight of what he'd taken on. The baby. He'd started thinking of her as Little Bit, though he knew he shouldn't name her, shouldn't get attached when this was likely temporary, made a small sound from the bassinet. Not crying, just that mewling noise that meant she'd be hungry soon. He had no idea what he was doing. The trip to the general store in Cottonwood Creek was an education in humility. He stood in the infant aisle, surrounded by products he couldn't identify, reading labels that might as well have been in a foreign language. Doc guided him through the basics: formula, bottles, nipples that came in different speeds for different ages, diapers sorted by weight, wipes, diaper cream, a thermometer, infant acetaminophen, burp cloths, swaddle blankets. How do people afford all this? Wes muttered, watching the total climb on the register. They manage, Doc said. Or they don't, and that's when things go bad. He helped carry the bags to Wes's truck. You'll get the hang of it. Nobody knows what they're doing at first, but walking through town with an infant in his arms drew attention Wes hadn't anticipated. People stared, whispered. Marge Henderson from the diner stopped him on the sidewalk. Wes Dalton, is that the baby everyone's talking about? The one you found in a tree? Yes, ma'am. Poor little thing. Any word on who left her? Sheriff's investigating. Well, isn't it something, you taking her in? Her eyes were kind but curious, the way people get when they're trying to piece together a story. After all you've been through. Must bring back memories. It did. That was the problem. Every time he held Little Bit, he remembered holding Emma. Every time he warmed a bottle, he remembered Sarah in the kitchen at midnight, humming softly while she fed their daughter. The house felt different now, filled with small sounds and new routines that were both comforting and painful. That evening, after Doc had gone home and darkness settled over the ranch, Wes stood in the doorway of the spare bedroom. The door had been closed for 20 years. He'd told himself it was to keep the dust out, to preserve things. But he knew the truth. He'd closed it because looking inside hurt too much. He turned the knob and pushed the door open. Everything was exactly as Sarah had left it. Emma's tiny bed with the pink quilt. The dresser with the music box that played Somewhere Over the Rainbow. The bookshelf with picture books they'd read together. And in the corner, covered with a sheet, the cradle his grandfather had built. Wes's throat tightened. He crossed the room and pulled the sheet away, revealing the hand-carved wood beneath. Oak, carefully shaped and sanded smooth, with small hearts carved into the headboard. His grandfather had made it for Wes's father, who had passed it down to Wes, who had rocked Emma in it every night until she outgrew it. He ran his hand along the polished wood, feeling the generations of love worked into every joint. Sarah had wanted to have another baby, had wanted to fill this cradle again. He'd said no, too afraid of losing someone else. And then he'd lost her anyway. I'm sorry, he whispered to the empty room. I should have been braver. Little Bit cried from the living room, a full-throated wail that demanded attention. Wes wiped his eyes and went to her, lifting her from the bassinet, holding her against his shoulder the way Doc had shown him. She quieted almost immediately, her small fist curling against his shirt. You want some company in here? He asked softly. I could bring the cradle out. Give you a proper place to sleep. It took him an hour to clean the cradle properly, checking every joint to make sure it was still sound. The wood had held up perfectly as he'd known it would. His grandfather had been a craftsman who believed in building things that lasted. Wes set it up in his own bedroom, close enough that he'd hear if Little Bit stirred in the night. When he finally laid her in it, wrapped in one of the new blankets, she looked impossibly small. But she seemed to sense the care that had gone into making this place, because she settled immediately, her breathing falling into the deep rhythm of infant sleep. Wes sat in the chair beside the cradle, watching her. The night feedings were hard. He was clumsy with the bottles, always worried he was doing something wrong. But there was something peaceful about them too. The house dark and quiet, just the two of them awake in the small circle of lamplight. He'd talk to her sometimes, telling her about the ranch, about Maude, about things he hadn't spoken aloud in years. Your mama or daddy might come back for you, he said one night, his voice barely above a whisper. Sheriff's still looking. If they do, that's where you belong, with your real family. He paused, surprised by the pain that accompanied the words. But if they don't, if they can't be found or can't take care of you proper, well, I guess we'll figure something out. You and me. Sheriff Moss stopped by on the 5th day, his expression grave. Got something you should know. Had a report from the Garrett place. Someone saw a truck out there the night before you found the baby. Dark-colored, maybe a Ford, couldn't make out the plates. Driver was walking around the property with a flashlight. The Garrett place is abandoned. Exactly. Which means whoever was there wasn't supposed to be. Clayton pulled out a map and pointed to the location. It's less than a mile from where you found her, Wes, through the woods in a straight line. You think someone was hiding out there, left the baby in the tree, then came back to check on her. Maybe. Or they were planning to retrieve her and got spooked when they saw activity near your property. Clayton folded the map. Either way, it means someone local might know something. I'm expanding the investigation, talking to everyone who's been in the area. But Wes, you need to be careful. If someone abandoned a baby and they find out you've got her, I'll be careful. I'm not just talking about locked doors. I mean, you need to think about what you're doing here. Getting attached when this might be temporary, when there might be people out there with claims on her. She doesn't belong to people who leave her in a tree to die, Wes said flatly. Clayton sighed. Legally, it's more complicated than that. Just promise me you'll be smart about this. After the sheriff left, Wes checked all the locks on the house, then went out to the barn and retrieved his old service pistol from where he'd kept it wrapped in oilcloth. He cleaned it methodically, loaded it, and placed it in the drawer of his bedside table. He'd hoped never to need it again. But if someone came for Little Bit with bad intentions, they'd find out quickly that Wes Dalton hadn't forgotten how to protect what mattered. That night, feeding Little Bit in the quiet darkness, Wes realized Doc had been right about one thing. He was getting attached. Every day made it harder to imagine giving her up, made it easier to picture a future where she stayed, where he taught her to ride Maude and told her stories about her grandmother, Sarah, and showed her how to track animals in the woods. Dangerous thoughts for a man who'd spent 20 years avoiding exactly this kind of hope. But watching her tiny hand wrap around his finger, feeling the trust she placed in him despite everything she'd already survived, Wes discovered something he'd thought died with Sarah and Emma. He discovered he was willing to try again. The lullaby book turned up in a box of Sarah's things Wes had stored in the hall closet. He'd been looking for extra blankets and found it wedged between photo albums, a small journal with water-stained pages, and Sarah's careful handwriting. She'd collected lullabies from everywhere, traditional songs she'd learned from her own mother, folk tunes she'd heard on the radio, even a few she'd made up herself. The pages fell open to one she'd sung every night, the ink slightly smeared, as if she'd been crying when she wrote it. Hush now, little darling. Close your weary eyes. Morning comes with sunlight, bringing bright blue skies. Wes's voice was rough and unpracticed, nothing like Sarah's clear soprano, but Little Bit seemed to respond to it anyway. Her fussing quieted, her eyes, starting to focus now, tracking movement, fixed on his face. He sat in the rocking chair with her cradled in his arms and worked his way through the songs, remembering how Sarah would sing them, how Emma would smile even in sleep when she heard her mother's voice. "You've got quite the audience there," Doc said from the doorway. Wes hadn't heard him come in. "She's putting on weight." "That's good. Means she's thriving. She's a fighter. So are you." Doc settled into the other chair, the one Wes kept by the window. "Town's talking, you know. About you and the baby. Let them talk. Some of it's good talk. People saying it's nice to see you engage with life again. Others," Doc hesitated, "others think you're too old for this. That you're setting yourself up for heartbreak. Maybe I am." Wes looked down at Little Bit, who'd fallen asleep to his terrible singing. "Doesn't mean I shouldn't try." Patricia Whitmore's 2-week evaluation happened on a Tuesday morning. She arrived with more paperwork and a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Wes had cleaned the house thoroughly, made sure everything was organized. Had Doc there as a character witness. "The baby looks healthy," Patricia noted, checking Little Bit's weight and measurements against a chart. You're managing the feedings well, keeping proper records. The home is clean and safe." She paused. "But I have some concerns, Mr. Dalton. Go ahead. You're 68 years old. You live alone, miles from town, with limited income. If something happened to you, a fall, a heart attack, any emergency, there'd be no one here to care for an infant. Doc checks on me every other day. Sheriff comes by regular. And I'm in good health for my age. I'm not questioning your health. I'm questioning whether this environment is suitable for raising a child long term." She softened slightly. "I can see you care about her. That's obvious. But caring isn't always enough." Doc spoke up then, his voice carrying the authority of 40 years in medicine. "Patricia, I've known Wes Dalton since we served together in Vietnam. He's one of the most reliable men I've ever met. Yes, he's older. Yes, he lives rural. But that baby was dying when he found her, and now she's thriving. You want to talk about suitable environments? I'd take a dedicated single parent in his 60s over a lot of the situations I've seen kids placed in." Patricia made notes, her expression unreadable. "I'll recommend continuation of temporary placement. But you should know there's been interest expressed by other parties." Wes's stomach dropped. "What kind of interest?" "Wade and Rebecca Kimball. They're local, I believe you know them?" He did. Wade Kimball owned the largest ranch in the county, ran cattle and horses on several thousand acres. His wife, Rebecca, came from oil money. They were prominent in the community, attended the Methodist church, hosted charity events. Everything Wes wasn't. The Kimballs are approved foster parents," Patricia continued. "They've expressed interest in providing care for this baby, potentially leading to adoption. They can offer resources you simply can't. A stable two-parent home, financial security, educational opportunities. They can't offer what I've already given her," Wes said quietly. "They weren't there when she needed someone. I was. I understand this is emotional, but these decisions have to be based on what's best for the child, not what makes the caregiver feel good." Patricia stood, gathering her papers. "I'll make my recommendation to the court. But Mr. Dalton, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that she might be placed elsewhere after she left." Wes sat with Little Bit and felt something he'd been avoiding since he pulled her from that tree, the full weight of what loving her meant. Not just the midnight feedings and the diaper changes and the worry, but the possibility of loss, the knowledge that she could be taken away as suddenly as she'd appeared, and he'd be powerless to stop it. "I should have kept my distance," he told Doc. "Should have let CPS place her somewhere else from the start. You did what you had to do. What any decent person would do. Now look where it's got me. Attached to a baby that isn't mine, probably never will be." Doc was quiet for a moment. "You want my honest opinion? I think you were half dead before you found her. Going through the motions, waiting for your time to run out. She gave you something to live for again. Even if it's temporary, that matters." That afternoon, Wade Kimball himself drove out to the ranch. Wes watched the expensive truck pull up, its paint gleaming, and felt immediately outmatched. Wade stepped out wearing pressed jeans and boots that probably cost more than Wes's entire wardrobe. He was 55, fit, successful, everything a child protective services worker would look for in a parent. "Wes," Wade said, extending his hand. "Hope I'm not intruding. What can I do for you, Wade? Heard you've got that baby here. The one from the tree. Rebecca and we've been praying about it, and we think maybe the Lord put her in our path for a reason." He smiled, the practiced smile of a man used to getting what he wanted. "We'd like to offer her a home. Give her the life she deserves. She has a home. With respect, Wes, you're not set up for this. No offense, you're an old bachelor living alone. Rebecca and we've got a nursery already set up. Had it ready for our own baby before we lost her." Pain flickered across his face, genuine this time. "We've got love to give and no one to give it to. That baby could have everything, education, opportunities, a real family. She has me." Wade's expression hardened slightly. "Be reasonable. You can't possibly believe you're the best option here. Think about what's good for the child, not what makes you feel better about your lonely life." The words stung because they echoed Wes's own doubts. But they also sparked something else. Anger at being dismissed, at being told he wasn't enough, at the assumption that money and youth mattered more than the fact that he'd been the one to save her life. "I think you should leave now," Wes said evenly. "I'm trying to be kind about this. But the fact is, I've got resources and connections you don't have. If this goes to court, then I'll see you in court. Now get off my property." After Wade left, Wes stood on the porch, shaking with anger and fear. Little Bit started crying inside, and he went to her, picked her up, held her against his chest until they both calmed down. "I won't let them take you," he whispered. "I don't care what they've got or who they know. You're staying here. Sheriff Moss arrived that evening with updates on the investigation. Been talking to folks, following up on that truck sighting. Got something interesting. Couple people saw a man and a woman asking questions around town about 2 weeks before you found the baby. Wanted to know about abandoned properties, places where someone could stay off the radar. Descriptions. Vague. Man was young, maybe late 20s, tall. Woman was around the same age, dark hair. Nobody got a good look at their faces, but both witnesses said they seemed nervous, jumpy. The baby's parents, maybe, or people who know what happened to them." Clayton hesitated. "There's something else. That truck at the Garrett place? We found evidence someone had been squatting there recently. Food wrappers, blankets, medications. What kind of medications? Prenatal vitamins, antibiotics, and baby formula." Clayton met his eyes. Someone was preparing to care for an infant. Then suddenly they weren't. Wes felt cold. "You think something happened to them?" "I think we need to find out. Because if the baby's mother is out there somewhere, unable to come back for her child, that's one thing. But if someone forced her to leave that baby," he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. That night, Wes sang every lullaby in Sarah's book. He sang until his voice was hoarse, until Little Bit was deeply asleep, until he'd memorized the words and the melodies, and the feeling of holding someone who depended on him completely. He thought about Wade Kimball's words, about Patricia Whitmore's concerns, about all the logical reasons why he shouldn't fight to keep this child. Then he thought about the hollow oak, about the burlap bundle, about how close Little Bit had come to dying alone in the dark. Some choices weren't logical. Some things were worth fighting for even when the odds were stacked against you. Wes had learned that in the war, had forgotten it in the long years after Sarah died, and was relearning it now. He was going to keep her. Whatever it took, whoever he had to face, he was going to make sure Little Bit stayed home. Wes waited until Doc could watch Little Bit before riding back to the hollow oak. He'd left Maude's saddle at home, traveling light with just a backpack containing his old tracking journal, camera, and evidence bags. The skills he'd learned tracking Viet Cong through jungle weren't so different from tracking whoever had left a baby in a tree. The hollow oak stood where it always had, ancient and patient. Wes tied Maude to a nearby branch and began his examination, this time with the methodical attention of a man looking for evidence rather than saving a life. Sheriff Moss had done a cursory search, but Clayton was a lawman, not a tracker. He wouldn't have seen what Wes was seeing now, boot prints barely visible in the leaf litter. 2 sets, one large, probably male, one smaller. The smaller prints showed signs of stumbling, the gait uneven, as if the person had been injured or exhausted. Wes followed them 20 yards into the brush and found where they'd paused, where someone had sat down heavily, where the leaves were disturbed in a pattern suggesting distress. He pulled out his camera and documented everything, then opened his tracking journal. The leather-bound notebook had accompanied him through 3 tours in Vietnam, filled with sketches of trails and notations about enemy movement patterns. He'd kept it after the war, using it to track wildlife on the ranch. Now he drew careful diagrams of the boot prints, noting size and tread pattern. Near where the smaller prints had rested, he found a fragment of fabric caught on a thorn bush. Pale blue cotton, torn, with what looked like bloodstains along the edge. He bagged it carefully, noting the location. A few feet away, partially buried in leaves, were cigarette butts, 3 of them, same brand. Smoked recently enough that they hadn't degraded. The trail led him in a rough circle back toward the Garrett property. where the sheriff had found evidence of squatting. Wes made notes on his map, marking the route, estimating distances. Whoever had left Little Bit had known this land, had used the old deer trails to move through it without being easily seen. He spent 2 hours processing the scene, collecting what evidence he could, building a picture of what might have happened. 2 people, one of them injured or ill, had made their way through this forest to the hollow oak. They'd left the baby and retreated the same way they'd come. But had they intended to return, or had they been fleeing something? Back at the ranch, Little Bit greeted him with what Doc insisted was gas, but looked remarkably like a smile. Her eyes tracked his movement now, and she made small cooing sounds when he talked to her. 3 weeks old, or close enough, and already she was claiming space in the world, announcing herself, refusing to be invisible. Found some things, Wes told Doc, spreading his findings on the kitchen table. Fabric, boot prints, cigarette butts. Someone was there with the baby and they left in a hurry. Doc examined the fabric fragment. This looks like it came from a nightgown or a hospital gown. See the simple construction? And these stains could be blood, could be something else. You give this to Clayton. Headed there tomorrow. But I wanted to document everything first, my way. Wes opened his tracking journal, showing Doc the sketches and notes. 2 people. The smaller one was struggling. They followed deer trails from the Garrett property to the oak and back. That's deliberate. Someone with woodcraft. Someone who knew how to move without being seen. Or someone desperate enough to learn fast, Doc suggested. The town meeting happened that Friday night at the Methodist church. Word had spread about the miracle baby, and the community was divided on what should happen next. Wes attended reluctantly, leaving Little Bit with Doc, feeling like he was walking into an ambush. Pastor Mackenzie moderated, trying to maintain order as people voiced their opinions. Some supported Wes. He'd saved the baby's life. He was doing a good job. Who cared if he was older or lived alone? Others sided with the Kimballs. A child deserved a proper family. 2 parents, financial security, opportunities a retired cowboy couldn't provide. Wade Kimball spoke with polished confidence. We all respect what Wes has done. He's a hero for finding that baby and getting her help. But heroism and parenting are different things. Rebecca and I can give this child everything she needs. We're asking the community to support what's best for her future. Wes didn't speak. He'd never been good at public talk, and he wasn't about to start now. But Marge Henderson from the diner stood up. I've seen Wes in town with that baby. Seen how he holds her, how careful he is. That's not a man going through the motions. That's a man who loves a child. Maybe that matters more than a fancy house and money in the bank. Others chimed in, the arguments growing heated. Wes slipped out before the meeting ended, heading to the diner for coffee and some air. The place was nearly empty, just him and Serena Vale, the young waitress who'd started working there a few months back. Coffee, she asked, her voice tight. Please. She poured it with shaking hands, and Wes noticed what he should have noticed before. She was nervous. Had been nervous every time he'd seen her lately. When she set the mug down, he caught her wrist gently. You all right, miss? She pulled away. Fine, just tired. You know something about that baby, don't you? Her eyes went wide, then filled with tears. Before Wes could say anything else, she grabbed her purse and ran out the back door. He started to follow, then stopped. Spooking her wouldn't help anyone. But he made a note in his journal. Serena Vale, 20-something, dark hair. Extremely nervous when questioned about the baby. He mentioned it to Sheriff Moss the next morning when he dropped off his evidence. Clayton looked troubled. Serena Vale. I ran her background when she applied for the waitress job, but Marge vouched for her, so I didn't dig deep. Maybe I should have. Something off about her? Her references don't check out. The phone numbers go to disconnected lines. The previous employer she listed doesn't exist. Clayton picked up his phone. I'll bring her in for questioning. See what she knows. But when Clayton went to find Serena, she was gone. Her apartment above the diner had been cleaned out. Her car disappeared. No note or forwarding address. Just vanished, like she'd never been there at all. Someone tipped her off, Clayton said grimly. Or she was watching, saw you getting suspicious. Either way, she's running. Wes felt cold. You think she's connected? Think she knows who left Little Bit? I think it's too big a coincidence. Young woman shows up in town 3 months ago, gives fake references, shows intense interest in a found baby, then runs the moment someone starts asking questions. Clayton shook his head. I've got an APB out on her. We'll find her. But Wes wasn't so sure. Serena Vale had disappeared as completely as the baby's parents, leaving only questions behind. That night, giving Little Bit her bottle, Wes thought about the torn blue fabric, about Serena's frightened eyes, about the boot prints leading through the forest. Pieces of a puzzle he couldn't quite see yet, but he was starting to understand the shape of it. Someone had been desperate. Someone had been running, and they'd left the most precious thing in the world in a hollow tree because they had no other choice. Little Bit finished her bottle, and Wes held her against his shoulder, patting her back gently until she burped. She made a small, satisfied sound and nestled against his neck, her breath warm on his skin. 3 weeks ago he'd been alone, resigned to dying alone, accepting it as his due. Now he had this small life depending on him, trusting him, filling the empty spaces with her presence. When she pulled back to look at him, her face scrunched in what Doc called gas, but what Wes knew was something more. Her first real smile broke across her tiny features. It was like sunshine, like grace, like a gift he'd done nothing to deserve. There you are, he whispered, smiling back at her. There's my girl. In that moment, something shifted inside him. The walls he'd built around his heart, thick and high and meant to last until death, crumbled just enough to let light in. He wasn't healed. The grief for Sarah and Emma would never fully leave. But maybe there was room for both, for sorrow and joy to coexist, for the past to inform the future without destroying it. He carried Little Bit to the cradle his grandfather had made and laid her down gently, covering her with the blanket Sarah had quilted 40 years ago. Past and present, loss and love, all woven together into something fragile and precious and worth protecting. Whatever was coming, and Wes knew something was coming, could feel it the way he used to feel approaching danger in the jungle. He'd face it, not because he was brave, but because he'd finally found something worth being afraid for. That was the difference between the man he'd been and the man he was becoming. The old Wes had nothing left to lose. The new one had everything. 4 weeks after finding Little Bit in the hollow oak, Wes sat across from a family court lawyer in Cottonwood Creek's only law office. Martha Chen had practiced family law for 30 years, and her expression told him everything he needed to know before she spoke. Mr. Dalton, I'm going to be honest with you. Your case has challenges. I understand that. I'm not sure you do. She spread papers across her desk, his financial records, medical history, home evaluation reports. You're 68, living on Social Security and modest savings. You live in an isolated location with no nearby family support. You're a single man who's never adopted before and hasn't raised a child in over 2 decades. Meanwhile, the Kimballs are younger, financially stable, have a 2-parent household and extensive community ties. But I'm the one who found her. I'm the one who's been caring for her, which counts for something, but not as much as you'd hope. The court's primary concern is the child's long-term welfare. Martha softened her tone. I'm not saying we can't win. I'm saying it's going to be difficult and expensive, and you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that the court might rule against you. The hearing was set for 3 weeks out. Patricia Whitmore had already submitted her report, which Wes learned was cautiously neutral, acknowledging his dedication but raising concerns about his age and isolation. The Kimballs had submitted their own petition, complete with letters of support from prominent community members, financial statements proving they could provide for all of Little Bit's needs, and photographs of the nursery they'd prepared. Wade Kimball called the ranch that evening. Wes, I'm not trying to be your enemy here. I respect what you've done for that baby, but you have to see reason. Rebecca and I, we can give her advantages you simply can't. Education fund, medical care, stability. What if something happens to you? Who takes care of her then? I'm working that out. Are you? Because from where I stand, you're being selfish. Holding on to a child because you're lonely, not because it's what's best for her. Wade paused. I'll make you an offer. Let us adopt her, and we'll set up an agreement where you can visit. Be like a grandfather to her. You'd still be part of her life, but she'd have what she needs." Wes's hand tightened on the phone. "She needs someone who loves her. Everything else is secondary. Love doesn't pay for college, Wes. Love doesn't guarantee a future." After he hung up, Wes stood in the dark kitchen, questioning everything. Was he being selfish? Was he so desperate for connection that he was willing to deprive little bit of opportunities she deserved? Every logical argument favored the Kimballs. Every practical consideration suggested he should step aside. But then, Little Bit cried from the bedroom, and he went to her, picked her up, felt her relax against his chest, and knew with absolute certainty that she belonged here. Not because it made sense, not because he could offer her advantages, but because they'd found each other when they both needed it most, and that had to mean something. Sheriff Moss arrived early the next morning, his cruiser kicking up dust as it sped down the drive. His expression was grim. "We identified Serena Vale, real name's Serena Garrett. She's from Oklahoma, connected to the Garrett family." Wes frowned. "Should that mean something to me?" "It should. The Garretts run criminal operations out of Tulsa. Drug trafficking, extortion, some suspicion of human trafficking, though nothing's been proven. Serena's father went to prison 5 years ago on racketeering charges. The family's been under FBI surveillance ever since. What's she doing here?" "That's what we're trying to figure out. FBI's involved now. They think she might have been running from family trouble, hiding out." "But Wes," Clayton's voice dropped, "they also think there's a connection to the baby. Serena showed up here 3 months ago. That lines up with late pregnancy. And her behavior when you started asking questions, the way she ran, she knows something. You think she's the mother?" "I think it's possible. Or she knows who is." Clayton glanced toward the house. "Either way, if the Garrett family is involved, this situation just got a lot more dangerous. These aren't people who let loose ends dangle." That night, checking the ranch before bed, Wes found boot prints beneath the living room window. Fresh prints, not his own, not Doc's. Someone had been standing there, looking in, watching. His military training kicked in immediately. He went through the house, turning off lights, then stood in the darkness, studying the area around the windows. More prints by the kitchen. Someone had circled the house, checking every room, learning the layout. He woke Doc with a phone call. "Need you to take Little Bit for the night. Someone's been watching the house." "Wes, what?" "No time to explain. Just come get her now." While he waited for Doc, Wes pulled his old duffel from the closet. Inside were things he hadn't touched in years: his service pistol, ammunition, the K-bar knife he'd carried in Vietnam, and a small medal on a worn chain. St. Christopher, patron saint of travelers and protectors. A chaplain had given it to him before his first patrol, told him to keep it close. He had, through 3 tours, through firefights and ambushes, through nights when he was sure he wouldn't see morning. The medal had survived when better men hadn't. He'd kept it in the duffel after the war, unable to throw it away but unwilling to wear it. What was he protecting anymore? But now, holding it in his palm, feeling the weight of all those years and memories, he knew what it was for. He placed it in Little Bit's cradle, tucking it beneath her blanket, where she'd be sleeping over it. Protected by whatever grace or luck or providence had kept him alive when he probably shouldn't have been. Doc arrived and Wes handed over Little Bit, a bag of supplies and instructions. "Anyone comes asking, you don't know where she is. Anyone you don't recognize comes near your place, you call Clayton immediately. What are you planning?" "Setting up security. If someone's watching, I want to know who and why." After they left, Wes worked through the night using skills he'd hoped to never need again. He set up tripwires along the approaches to the house, simple but effective. He positioned mirrors to give him views of blind spots. He moved his truck to where it could be reached quickly if he needed to evacuate. And he established fields of fire from defensive positions, marking distances, noting cover. By dawn, his ranch had become a defensible position. Not impregnable, nothing was, but good enough that nobody would take him by surprise. Sheriff Moss returned with federal agents that afternoon. They documented the boot prints, took photographs, asked questions about Serena Garrett and the Garrett family. A young FBI agent named Torres pulled Wes aside. "Mr. Dalton, we believe Serena Garrett may have information about an ongoing criminal investigation. If she's the baby's mother or knows who is, we need to find her. But I have to warn you, the Garrett family doesn't appreciate witnesses or loose ends. If they think that baby can be connected to them somehow, then they'd want her gone," Wes finished, "or they'd want her back to control what she might reveal later." Torres looked uncomfortable. "I'm not trying to scare you, but you should understand what you might be dealing with. These are dangerous people. I've dealt with dangerous people before. Vietnam?" Torres had clearly read his file. "With respect, sir, this isn't the same. You're not a young soldier anymore, and you've got a baby to protect. Maybe it would be better to let us handle this, place the child in protective custody while we sort things out." "No, Mr. Dalton, she stays with me." End of discussion. After they left, Wes walked the perimeter again, checking his defenses, thinking about what Torres had said. The man was right. He wasn't young anymore. His reflexes had slowed, his body had aged, and he was responsible for an infant who couldn't defend herself or even understand the danger. But giving her up wasn't an option. Not to protective custody, not to the Kimballs, not to anyone. She was his now, in all the ways that mattered. He'd found her when she needed someone, and now she'd given him something to fight for. That made them family, regardless of what any court or social worker or federal agent might say. Doc brought Little Bit back the next morning, concerned but supportive. "You're sure about this? About digging in?" "I'm sure. Then you're not doing it alone." "I'm staying." "Doc, not arguing, Wes. You need someone watching your back, and I'm it. Besides, someone has to keep that baby fed while you're playing soldier." So Doc moved into the spare room, the one that had been Emma's, and the two old men prepared to defend a baby they'd known for barely a month against threats they didn't fully understand. Wes held Little Bit that evening, singing from Sarah's lullaby book, and wondered what Sarah would think of all this. Probably that he was crazy. Probably that he should let the authorities handle it. But maybe, just maybe, she'd understand why he couldn't, why giving up on Little Bit would be like giving up on everything he'd ever believed about duty and protection, and standing up when standing up mattered. The St. Christopher medal glinted in the lamplight from its place in the cradle. Wes touched it once, remembering the chaplain's words. "This doesn't guarantee safety, just reminds you what you're protecting." He understood that now. Understood that safety was an illusion, but protection was a choice. And Wes Dalton had made his choice the moment he pulled a dying baby from a hollow tree and decided she deserved to live. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. Maude's bray shattered the midnight silence, the sound sharp with warning. Wes was on his feet instantly, muscle memory from Vietnam overriding the fog of sleep. He grabbed his pistol and moved to the window, staying low, scanning the darkness. Doc appeared in the hallway, already dressed. "What is it?" "Dunno." "Stay with the baby." Wes slipped out the back door, moving along the side of the house toward where Maude was tied near the corral. The donkey was agitated, ears flat, staring toward the main gate. Then Wes heard it. A sound like someone crying, desperate and afraid. He approached carefully, pistol ready, and found a woman collapsed against his gate. She was young, mid-20s, wearing clothes that were torn and bloodied. Her face was swollen from what looked like a beating, one eye nearly shut, lips split. When she saw him, she tried to scramble away, but didn't have the strength. "Please," she gasped. "Please, I need help. He's coming. He's going to kill me." Wes recognized her even through the injuries. "Serena Garrett." She nodded, tears streaming down her damaged face. "Is she alive?" "The baby, is she? She's alive inside, safe." He lowered the pistol. "You're her mother?" "Yes." The word came out broken, full of grief and relief. "I need to see her. Please, before he finds me, I need to—" "Who's coming?" "Vance, my cousin. He tracked me here." She tried to stand, collapsed. "He's maybe an hour behind me. I stole his truck, wrecked it 5 miles back, ran the rest of the way." "He's coming for her, Mr. Dalton. He's coming to finish what I tried to stop." Wes helped her inside, calling for Doc. Between them, they got her onto the couch. Doc began examining her injuries, while Wes called Sheriff Moss. Serena was talking, words tumbling out fast and desperate. "The confession of someone who'd been carrying secrets too long. My real name is Serena Garrett. I'm 19. My father's in prison, and my cousin Vance took over the family business. Drugs, guns, girls. Anything that makes money." She flinched as Doc cleaned a cut on her forehead. "He raped me when I was 17. Said it was family business, keeping the bloodline strong. I got pregnant and tried to run, but they found me. Brought me back." Wes felt sick. "The baby. I wanted to protect her. Vance said she'd be useful when she got older. Said he could sell her to people who wanted infants, make good money." I knew what he meant. I'd seen what happened to other girls in the family. Serena was shaking, her words coming between sobs. I pretended to go along with it, waited until I was close to term, then ran again. Made it here to Cottonwood Creek. Hid in the abandoned Garrett property. No relation. Just coincidence. "You gave birth there," Wes said, remembering the evidence Sheriff Moss had found. Alone. I cut the cord with scissors I'd stolen. Wrapped her in the only clean cloth I had. But I was sick, bleeding badly. I knew I couldn't take care of her properly. Knew Vance was still looking. I had to make a choice. Her good eye fixed on Wes. "I put her in that tree because I knew you rode that route. I'd been watching for weeks, learning your patterns. I knew you'd find her. Why didn't you just bring her to me?" "Because Vance has contacts everywhere. Police, social services, hospitals. If I'd walked up to your door, someone would have reported it. But if you found her, if you claimed her and raised alarm, there'd be attention, documentation, witnesses. Harder for him to make her disappear." She pulled a folded envelope from inside her jacket, the paper stained with blood. "I wrote everything down. Names, dates, crimes I witnessed. Everything Vance did, everything the family does. It's all in here. Proof the FBI can use." Sheriff Moss arrived with 2 deputies, took one look at Serena, and called for an ambulance and FBI backup. While they waited, Serena told her story again, this time on record, her voice steady despite the pain. She described 3 years of abuse, multiple attempts to escape, the night she finally got away with her baby. "I've been watching from a distance," she said. "Made sure she was okay. Saw you taking care of her. Saw how careful you were. I wanted to tell you, wanted to explain, but I couldn't risk leading Vance to her." Fresh tears streaked her bruised face. "Then yesterday he found me, beat me, demanded to know where the baby was. I told him she died during birth, but he didn't believe me. Said he'd tear this town apart until he found her." Agent Torres arrived with 2 other FBI agents, took immediate control of the scene. "Ms. Garrett, you're wanted for questioning in Oklahoma, but you're also a victim and potentially a witness in multiple federal investigations." He looked at the bloody letter she'd handed to Sheriff Moss. "This is significant evidence. We can offer you protection in exchange for cooperation. I'll tell you everything. Just please keep her away from him. Don't let him near that baby." Torres turned to Wes. "Mr. Dalton, we need to evacuate you and the child. Vance Garrett is extremely dangerous. He's wanted for trafficking, assault, and murder. If he's coming here, then we need to be ready for him," Wes interrupted. "This is my land. I'm not running. With respect, you're a 68-year-old civilian who spent 3 tours in Vietnam and knows how to defend a position. You want to help? Post your agents where they'll be useful. Otherwise, stay out of my way." Sheriff Moss stepped in. "Wes is right about one thing. Running will just move the problem somewhere else. Garrett will keep looking until he finds the baby. Better to end it here, on ground we choose, with proper preparation." The next 3 hours were controlled chaos. FBI agents established surveillance positions. Sheriff Moss coordinated with state police for backup. Doc kept Little Bit calm in the bedroom while Serena, refusing to go to the hospital until she'd seen her daughter, finally got her wish. Wes carried Little Bit out, and Serena's face crumpled when she saw her. She's so big, so healthy. She reached out with trembling fingers, touched the baby's hand. Little Bit wrapped her tiny fingers around Serena's, and Serena broke down completely. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I left you. I thought it was the only way to keep you safe." It was, Wes said quietly. You made the right call. She's alive because of what you did. Will you? Serena looked up at him, her good eye pleading. Will you keep her? After all this, will you still fight for her? Already planning to. Thank you. Thank you for saving her. Thank you for loving her. She kissed Little Bit's forehead gently. Be good for him, okay? Be strong. Don't let anyone make you feel small. The ambulance took Serena away, along with 2 FBI agents for security. Agent Torres stayed behind, coordinating with the law enforcement presence that was rapidly transforming Wes's ranch into a defensive position. Vance Garrett's vehicle was spotted 40 miles north, Torres reported. He's driving a stolen truck, armed, and he's not alone. Looks like he brought at least 3 others with him. They'll be here within the hour. Wes checked his pistol, verified his rifle was loaded. The defenses he'd set up the previous night would help, but against 4 armed men, they might not be enough. Doc stood beside him, holding a shotgun with the confidence of a man who'd carried wounded soldiers under fire. You don't have to do this, Wes told him. You could leave with the baby, get her somewhere safe, and let you face this alone. Not a chance. Doc checked the shotgun's chamber. Besides, I've been bored in retirement. This is the most alive I've felt in years. Despite the situation, Wes smiled. Some bonds were forged in fire and never broke, no matter how much time passed. Agent Torres positioned FBI agents at strategic points around the property. Sheriff Moss had his deputies covering the main road approaches. State police were en route, but were still 20 minutes out. It would have to be enough. Wes stood on his porch as the sun started to rise, watching the eastern horizon, waiting. Little Bit slept in her cradle inside, protected by layers of security, but still vulnerable. Still dependent on the people who'd chosen to stand between her and harm. He thought about Serena's question. Would he still fight for Little Bit after learning the truth? The answer had been immediate and instinctive. Knowing where she came from, who her father was, what horrors had surrounded her birth, none of it mattered. She was innocent. She was his. And he would protect her with everything he had. Maude brayed from the corral, ears forward, staring down the road. Here we go, Sheriff Moss said quietly, raising his radio. All units, subjects approaching. Hold positions and wait for my signal. In the distance, Wes could see dust rising from the road. 4 figures in a truck coming fast, bringing violence and hate to a place that had finally learned to hold love again. He checked his rifle one last time and settled into position. Whatever happened next, whatever the cost, Vance Garrett would not take that baby. Not from this house, not from this man. Not while Wes Dalton still drew breath. Agent Torres laid out the situation with military precision. Vance Garrett's last known location was 30 miles south. He's driving a stolen Ford F-250, dark blue, accompanied by at least 3 armed associates. They know Serena came here, which means they know about the baby. Wes studied the hand-drawn map he'd created of his property, marking defensive positions with the same attention to detail he'd learned in Vietnam. Every rise in the land, every building, every sightline, all documented. This was the ranch map that would either save them or record where they'd made their last stand. We need to evacuate the child, Torres said. Get her somewhere secure while we handle this. Where? Wes asked. Garrett has reach. You said yourself he's got contacts in law enforcement and social services. Anywhere official might already be compromised. Patricia Whitmore had arrived an hour earlier, her professional demeanor cracking under the weight of the situation. I can take her to a state facility. Maximum security, limited access. Only a handful of people would know her location. Wes looked at Little Bit, sleeping in her cradle, oblivious to the storm gathering around her. The thought of sending her away, even temporarily, felt like failure. But keeping her here while armed men approached felt like something worse. Do it, he said finally. The words tasted like ash. But I want updates every hour. And the moment this is over, I want her back. Of course, Patricia's expression softened. Mr. Dalton, what you're doing, protecting her like this, it's remarkable. Most people would have handed her over to CPS from the start, avoided all this trouble. She's not trouble. She's family. Preparing Little Bit to leave was harder than any combat Wes had faced. He packed her supplies with shaking hands, including Sarah's lullaby book and his St. Christopher medal. Doc watched from the doorway, his own expression troubled. "You sure about this?" Doc asked. "No, but it's the right call." Wes picked up Little Bit, held her close, breathing in that particular baby smell of milk and innocence. "Hey there, Little Bit. You're going on a trip for a while. Just a little while, I promise. Then you're coming home." She gurgled at him, her tiny hand wrapping around his finger with surprising strength. Wes felt his throat tighten, felt tears threatening for the first time since Sarah's funeral. He'd gotten too attached. Everyone had warned him about that. But attachment was another word for love, and he wouldn't apologize for it. "I'm going to come get you," he whispered against her soft hair. "Soon as it's safe, I'm coming for you. You have my word on that." Patricia took her gently, securing her in a car seat, while 2 state troopers prepared to escort them. The convoy would take back roads, change routes randomly, maintain radio silence. Every precaution possible. Wes stood on the porch, watching the vehicles disappear down his drive, dust rising in their wake. The ranch felt instantly emptier, as if Little Bit's presence had been filling spaces he hadn't known were hollow. "She'll be fine," Doc said, though his voice suggested he was trying to convince himself as much as Wes. "Patricia's good at her job. Those troopers won't let anything happen. I know." Wes turned back to face his property, seeing it now through tactical eyes. "Come on, we've got work to do." Sheriff Moss arrived with 2 deputies, young men Wes didn't know well, but who looked steady enough. The FBI had 3 agents positioned around the perimeter, plus Torres coordinating everything from the house. Not a large force, but disciplined and well-armed. Wes walked them through his defensive plan, pointing out positions on his map. The barn gives good sightlines to the main approach. The rise behind the house covers the north side. We've got natural choke points here and here, where the land funnels toward the buildings. Torres studied the map with professional appreciation. "You did this in Vietnam?" "Among other things. Mostly I tried not to die." Wes marked another position. "The trick isn't having overwhelming force. It's making the enemy think twice about engaging, making them pay for every inch they take." "The goal is arrest, not casualties," Torres reminded him. "The goal is survival. If Garrett and his men can be taken alive, fine. But I'm not dying for procedure, and I'm not letting anyone here die for it either." Doc had retrieved his own weapon, a hunting rifle that had taken deer for 40 years and would serve just as well against 2-legged threats. "Haven't done this kind of thing since '69, he said, checking the rifle's action. "Feels strange, gearing up for combat at 73. "You don't have to do this," Wes told him. "This isn't your fight. The hell it isn't. That baby's as much mine as anyone's. I was there when you found her, helped keep her alive those first critical hours. I'll be here when her father comes looking for her too." They spent the next 2 hours fortifying positions, establishing communication protocols, preparing fallback positions if the primary line failed. Sheriff Moss positioned his deputies to cover the main road. FBI agents took the outer perimeter. Doc and Wes would hold the house itself, the final defensive position. As they worked, Wes's mind kept drifting to Vietnam. The parallels were impossible to ignore. Then as now, he'd been defending a position against superior numbers. Then as now, retreat wasn't an option. But there was one critical difference. In Vietnam, he'd been fighting for abstract concepts like duty and country. Here, he was fighting for something concrete and precious. He was fighting for family. "Tell me about Martinez," Doc said during a quiet moment. Both of them positioned in the living room, with views of different approaches. "The night you carried him out." Wes hadn't thought about Martinez in years. "He was hit during an ambush. Took shrapnel in both legs, couldn't walk. Gaman said leave him, that staying would get the whole platoon killed. I went back anyway. Why? Because he was one of ours. Because leaving him felt like losing a piece of myself." Wes checked his rifle's magazine, the motion automatic. "I've spent 20 years convinced I'd used up all my courage that night, that I didn't have anything left to give. But maybe courage isn't something you use up. Maybe it's something that comes back when you need it. You found your purpose again," Doc observed. "That's what Little Bit gave you," Not just a reason to live, but a reason to fight. I thought I was done. Thought my story had ended when Sarah died, that everything after was just epilogue. But maybe there are no epilogues, just new chapters. Maybe it's never too late to matter again. The sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the Texas sky in shades of crimson and gold. Beautiful and terrible, the way sunsets often were before battles. Wes found himself thinking about Sarah, about Emma, about all the people he'd loved and lost. They were gone, but their memory informed everything he did now. They'd made him who he was, someone who protected others, someone who stood when others might run. His radio crackled. Torres's voice came through tense. "We've got movement. Multiple vehicles approaching from the south. ETA 10 minutes. How many?" Wes asked. "Initial count shows 4 trucks. More men than we expected. Looks like Garrett brought a full crew." Wes and Doc exchanged glances. 4 trucks meant at least 12 men, possibly more. Double what intelligence had suggested. The odds had just gotten significantly worse. "State police?" Sheriff Moss asked over the radio. "Still 20 minutes out. We're on our own until then." Wes moved to the window, watching the road through his binoculars. He could see the dust now rising in the distance. Multiple vehicles moving fast, no attempt at stealth. Vance Garrett was coming straight at them, confident in his numbers and firepower. "Everyone hold positions," Torres ordered. "Do not engage until they make the first move. We need them on record as aggressors." But Wes knew how this would go. Men like Vance Garrett didn't negotiate. They didn't surrender. They took what they wanted and destroyed anyone who got in their way. The FBI might want arrests and evidence, but Wes knew they'd be lucky to survive the next hour. He thought about Little Bit, safe in some anonymous facility miles away. Thought about her smile, her small sounds, the way she trusted him completely. She deserved to grow up, deserved to have a chance at life. That's what this was really about. Not revenge, not pride, not even justice exactly. Just giving one innocent child the opportunity to live in a world that hadn't wanted her. The vehicles came into view. 4 trucks loaded with men. They stopped just outside rifle range, and Wes could see them organizing, planning their approach. Vance Garrett stood in the center, tall and confident, directing his crew with the ease of someone who'd done this many times before. "Here we go," Sheriff Moss said quietly over the radio. Wes checked his rifle one final time, feeling the familiar weight, remembering other times when everything had come down to training and instinct and the will to survive. He'd been younger then, faster, less breakable, but he'd also had less to lose. Now he had everything to lose, and that made him more dangerous than Vance Garrett could possibly understand. "Doc," he said, not looking away from the approaching men. "Yeah? If this goes wrong, if they get past us somehow, they won't. But if they do, I want you to get out. Don't die here for my fight." Doc was quiet for a moment, then, "Funny, I was about to tell you the same thing. But we both know neither of us is leaving, so let's just focus on making sure they don't get past us." Wes smiled despite the situation. "Works for me." The radio crackled again. "Torres, they're moving. All units stand ready." Through the binoculars, Wes watched Vance Garrett raise a megaphone. The confrontation he'd known was coming, that he'd prepared for, that would determine Little Bit's future one way or another, was about to begin. Wes took a deep breath, feeling remarkably calm. This was what his whole life had been preparing him for, not the years of peace and quiet, but this moment when everything hung in the balance and only his actions would tip the scales. The sun touched the horizon, turning the sky to blood and fire. In the distance, Maude brayed once, a sound of warning and recognition, and Vance Garrett began to speak. "Wes Dalton!" Vance Garrett's voice boomed across the property through the megaphone. "I know you're in there. I know you've got something that belongs to me. Send her out and nobody gets hurt." Wes stayed behind cover, not responding. Let Garrett wonder. Let him waste time making demands that would never be met. Every minute that passed brought state police closer. Agent Torres's voice came through the radio. "Do not engage. Let him talk himself out." But Garrett wasn't the talking type, not really. After 30 seconds of silence, his tone changed, became harder. "You think you can protect her, old man? You think these cops can stop us?" We've dealt with law enforcement before. We always get what we came for." Sheriff Moss stood up behind his cruiser, badge glinting in the fading light. "Vance Garrett, you're wanted on multiple federal warrants. Put down your weapons and surrender peacefully." Garrett laughed, the sound carrying clearly in the still air. "You really think that's how this ends?" "I came for family property. That baby's a Garrett. She belongs with us." Wes couldn't help himself. "She belongs with someone who will love her, not someone who'd sell her like livestock." The silence that followed was dangerous. Then Garrett's voice turned venomous. "You've been talking to my cousin. That's unfortunate for all of you." A pause. "You want to know something funny, old man? I know she's not even here. I know you moved her, but I've got friends in the right places. Friends who can find out where Child Protective Services stashes their precious cargo. I'll get her eventually. Question is, do you die today trying to stop me? Or do you walk away and live to regret it?" Ice ran through Wes's veins. Garrett was bluffing. He had to be. But what if he wasn't? What if there really was someone feeding him information? Someone who could track Little Bit to wherever Patricia had taken her? "He's fishing," Doc said quietly from his position. "Trying to scare you into making a mistake. Maybe, but we can't take that chance." One of Garrett's men fired without warning. The bullet punching through the porch rail, 6 inches from where Wes had been standing moments before. The fight was on. FBI agents returned fire immediately, their shots disciplined and aimed. Sheriff Moss opened up with his shotgun, the heavy reports echoing across the property. Wes added his own rifle to the mix, placing shots with the precision of long practice. Garrett's crew scattered, taking cover behind their trucks and the natural terrain features. They were organized, moving with military efficiency that suggested professional training or at least extensive experience. These weren't thugs. They were soldiers in a criminal army. The firefight settled into a tense exchange, both sides firing to keep the other pinned while looking for openings. Wes counted at least 8 men on Garrett's side, plus Vance himself. "Bad odds, even with law enforcement support. They're probing the north side," Torres reported over the radio. "2 men trying to flank." "I see them," one of the FBI agents responded. "Engaging. More gunfire than silence. Both down, non-fatal wounds. Suspects in custody. 6 men left, but that was still more than enough to overrun the position if they coordinated properly." Wes watched Garrett directing his crew, saw the tactical thinking happening. They'd test the defenses, find the weak points, then commit to a full assault. "Here they come," Doc warned. 3 of Garrett's men broke cover simultaneously, advancing on the house under covering fire from their companions. It was a professional move, well executed, and for a moment, Wes thought they might actually breach the perimeter, but Sheriff Moss's deputies were in the right positions, their angles of fire overlapping to create a killing zone. One attacker went down immediately, hit in the leg. The other 2 made it to the barn but found themselves pinned, unable to advance or retreat. "Hold your fire," Torres shouted. "Suspects, throw down your weapons and surrender." One of the men tried to run back to the trucks. He made it maybe 10 yards before an FBI agent shot him in the shoulder, spinning him around. He went down hard. Doc moved then, showing more courage than sense. He ran out to the wounded man, medical instincts overriding self-preservation. "Don't shoot. I'm a medic." "Doc, get back here," Wes yelled. But Doc was already kneeling beside the wounded attacker, checking his injuries. "This one's not going anywhere," Doc called back. "Shoulder wound, lots of blood, but nothing arterial." He pressed gauze against the wound, and the man gasped in pain. "Who's paying you?" "Why are you here?" Vance said. "Said there was money," the man stammered. "Easy job. Get the kid, deliver her to someone in Oklahoma." "Didn't know it would be like this." "Who's the buyer?" Doc demanded. "Don't know. Vance handles that stuff. Just told us the kid was worth 50 grand. $50,000. Wes felt sick. Little Bit was being hunted not for family reasons, but as merchandise, a commodity to be bought and sold. Vance Garrett's voice cut through the standoff again, now tinged with genuine anger. "This is your last chance, Dalton. I can wait you out. I've got all night and reinforcements coming. But you've got nothing. And when I finally get what I came for, I'm going to make sure you regret every second of this." Wes looked at Sarah's photograph on the windowsill, the one he'd placed there before the fight began. Her smile looked back at him, frozen in a moment of happiness from 40 years ago. She'd never backed down from protecting what mattered. Neither would he. "He's going to escalate," Wes told Torres over the radio. "These people don't surrender. They'll burn us out if they have to." As if in answer, Wes saw movement near the barn. One of Garrett's men was carrying something, a can, probably gasoline. "They're going for the barn," he warned. "They're going to try to flush us out with fire." The barn erupted in flames so quickly it had to have been accelerant-soaked in advance. Orange fire climbed the dry wood, sending smoke billowing into the darkening sky. Garrett's plan was clear: create chaos, force defenders to react, use the confusion to advance. But Wes had seen this tactic before, in Vietnam villages where the enemy would burn structures to flush out targets. The key was not to panic, not to abandon defensive positions for the sake of property that could be rebuilt. "Hold the line," he ordered into the radio. "The barn's lost. Focus on stopping their advance." Maude was braying frantically from her corral near the burning barn, the old donkey terrified by the flames. Wes made a split-second decision. "Doc, cover me!" He ran to the corral, fumbling with the latch while bullets kicked up dirt around him. Maude was wild-eyed, ready to bolt. Wes grabbed her halter, felt the familiar brass bell hanging from it. The same bell his grandfather had placed there decades ago, its ring audible across the entire property. An idea formed. Risky, maybe crazy, but sometimes crazy, was all you had. He pointed Maude toward the tree line opposite Garrett's position and slapped her hard on the rump. "Go, girl, run!" The donkey bolted, her bell clanging frantically with each step. The sound carried clearly through the firefight, drawing immediate attention. Several of Garrett's men turned toward it, thinking someone was flanking them, wasting precious seconds tracking movement in the wrong direction. Those seconds were all Wes needed. He circled wide, using the smoke and confusion as cover, working his way toward Garrett's position. This was the offensive move he'd been planning, the calculated risk that could end this one way or another. Sheriff Moss saw what he was doing and increased fire from his position, keeping Garrett's men pinned and focused forward. Wes came up behind two of Garrett's crew, both focused on the house. He had them cold, could have shot them. Instead, he used the rifle butt, dropping both with quick, brutal efficiency. No need to kill when unconscious served the same purpose. Vance Garrett stood 20 yards away, directing his remaining men, unaware that his perimeter had been breached. Wes approached carefully, weapon ready, closing the distance. "Vance Garrett," he called out. Vance spun, his weapon coming up, surprise and rage warring on his face. "You're supposed to be pinned down." "Supposed to be" is different from what is. Wes kept his rifle trained on Garrett's center mass. "It's over. Put down the weapon." "The hell it is." Vance's eyes darted, calculating odds. "My men are dead, wounded, or in custody. You're alone." For a moment, Wes thought Garrett might actually surrender. Then he saw the shift in the younger man's eyes, the decision to go down fighting rather than face what waited in prison. Garrett's weapon swung toward Wes, finger tightening on the trigger. Wes fired first, but age and adrenaline threw his aim off. The bullet caught Garrett in the side instead of center mass, spinning him but not dropping him. They both moved then, closing distance, rifles abandoned for close-quarters combat. Garrett was younger, stronger, fueled by desperation. He tackled Wes, driving him backward into the dirt. Fists flew, neither man fighting clean, both fighting to survive. Wes felt ribs crack under a brutal punch, tasted blood. Garrett's hands found his throat, squeezing. Stars burst behind Wes's eyes. This was it, he thought dimly. 68 was too old for this kind of fight. He'd made his stand, but it wasn't enough. Then a shotgun roared and Garrett jerked, his grip loosening. Doc stood 10 feet away, smoke curling from the barrel of his weapon. "Nobody kills my best friend," Doc said flatly. "Not today." Garrett collapsed, gasping, blood spreading across his shirt. Not a killing shot. Doc had aimed carefully, but devastating enough to end the fight. Sheriff Moss and the FBI agents swarmed in, securing Garrett and his remaining crew. State police vehicles finally arrived, their help no longer critical but welcome nonetheless. The battle was over, Wes lay in the dirt, ribs screaming, throat bruised, watching orange flames devour his barn, while Maude's bell rang faintly from somewhere in the darkness. Doc knelt beside him, checking for injuries with practiced hands. "You're getting too old for this kind of excitement," Doc said, but his voice shook with relief. "So are you. That was a hell of a shot. Couldn't let you have all the glory." Agent Torres helped Wes to his feet, surveying the damage. 3 of Garrett's men dead, 4 wounded including Vance. 1 escaped into the woods but unlikely to get far. On their side, some property damage and a few minor injuries, but everyone alive. "All things considered, it could have been much worse. Vance Garrett is in custody," Torres said. "With Serena's testimony and what happened here, he's looking at life without parole. The rest of the Garrett operation will fall apart without leadership. You did good work, Mr. Dalton." But Wes wasn't thinking about the Garrett family or federal cases. He was thinking about a baby girl in a secure facility miles away, wondering when he could bring her home. "Can you call Patricia Whitmore?" he asked Torres. "Tell her it's safe. Tell her I'm coming for a little bit. Already done." "She's on her way back." Torres smiled slightly. "That baby's lucky to have you." "I'm the lucky one," Wes said, and meant it with every bruised, battered fiber of his being. Morning came soft and blue the day after the firefight, a shy light that seemed to ask permission before it crossed the Dalton place. Smoke still threaded the air where the barn had been, and ash lay on the grass like a dusting of grey snow. Wes stood in it barefoot, coffee in one hand, St. Christopher medal warm in the other. Doc slept in the chair by the door, shotgun across his knees, snoring the unembarrassed snore of a man who'd earned it. A convoy pulled up at 9. No sirens this time, just Patricia Whitmore's sedan tucked between 2 cruisers. She stepped out with a small, careful smile and a car seat he would have recognized blindfolded. "Back where she belongs," Patricia said. He didn't realize he'd been holding his breath until the first sound left the car. That soft, indignant mule he'd come to recognize as Little Bit's way of clearing her throat before telling the world her opinion. Wes reached for her, and everything else, the ash, the wreckage, the ache in his ribs, faded to background noise. She settled against him like a key falling home into an old lock. CPS policy would normally require a hospital check after an incident like this. Patricia went on, voice professional but gentled. "Agent Torres signed off on a field clearance, and I rewrote my recommendation." Wes looked up. "I wrote that the safest place for this child, given the credible threat against her, is the home of the man who has already proven he'll stand in the way of harm. If the court wants a list of supports, I noted them too. Dr. Brennan, Sheriff Moss, half your neighbors, and," she actually smiled, "one very opinionated donkey." Maude huffed from the shade of the lone surviving cottonwood as if on cue. By noon, trucks began arriving the way rain used to, tentatively at first, then all at once. Marge from the diner brought food. The Hernandez boys unloaded posts. 2 of the Kimball ranch hands came with a flatbed of rough-cut lumber. People who hadn't set foot on the Dalton place in years walked the scorched ground with their hats in their hands and asked where to start. Late in the afternoon, Wade Kimball himself pulled up and stood awkwardly with a hammer he probably hadn't swung since high school. He cleared his throat. "Wes," he said, the word taking more effort than a $1,000 donation. "I was wrong." Silence pressed between them. Wes shifted a little bit higher on his shoulder and waited. "My wife," Wade went on, "lost a baby. We built a room and a life around a child who never came home. When yours did," he swallowed, "I mistook your blessing for my second chance. That wasn't fair to her or to you." Wes let out the breath he hadn't meant to hold. "There's work needs doing if you're still set on helping." They built until the light failed, and the sky went coral and copper. It wasn't a real barn raising. No one could replace what the fire had taken in a day. But by sundown, a stout frame stood where blackened posts had been. Marge passed plates. Wade held a flashlight while Doc wrapped Wes's ribs tighter. Sheriff Moss leaned against his cruiser, talking low with Agent Torres about court dates and chain of custody and the way one rotten tree can bring down a grove if no one cuts it first. Serena called that night from a hospital 2 counties over, her voice steady but frayed. They say I'll testify, then go into protection, she said. Start over where nobody knows the name Garrett. They asked about the baby's birth certificate, and I told them the truth. There isn't one. Mr. Dalton, I signed papers today terminating my parental rights. It's the only way to keep her safe from my family and from me. A beat. I wrote a letter for when she's old enough. I told her the bad part and the good part. I told her that when I put her in that tree, I loved her more than my own life. Wes didn't trust his voice. He looked at the cradle. Little Bit slept with one fist up by her ear, hair like a shadow on the pillow. We'll keep it for her, he said. We'll keep you for her too, only the true parts. Name her, Serena whispered. Give her yours if you want it. Give her a first name that means something to you, not to the people who hurt me. After he hung up, he took down Sarah's lullaby book and turned to the first page, the one where Sarah had written their daughter's full name in looping pen. Then a second hand had tried to copy the letters underneath. He touched Emma's cramped E like a blessing and spoke to a room where the past and the present sat companionably side by side. Grace, he said softly, tasting the word, because that's what found us when we weren't looking. And Maude, for the old lady who insisted I see what was right in front of me. Grace Maude Dalton. Doc, listening from the doorway, nodded once. Amen. The hearing came 3 weeks later in a panelled courtroom that smelled faintly of lemon oil and nerves. The Kimballs surprised everyone by submitting a statement of support for Wes's petition and an offer, a college fund in the child's name, no strings attached. Wade read it himself, voice steady. We want her to have every door open, he said. The only door we won't push on is the one that leads her away from home. Patricia testified to the emergency, to the quiet competence of a man who asked for nothing and did everything right. Agent Torres, in a suit that made him look like a kid playing dress-up, testified to Vance Garrett's arrest and the credibility of Serena's statement. Doc took the stand and told a room full of strangers what he'd seen on an examination table in a converted garage, the day a stubborn old cowboy turned into a father again. When it was Wes's turn, he didn't talk about Vietnam or courts or the price of diapers. He talked about a hollow oak, about a face the size of his palm, about a ring he'd never taken off because love doesn't leave just because a heartbeat stops. He talked about fear, the honest kind that keeps you careful, and about a baby who didn't know she'd been born into a fight and reached for the world anyway. The judge, a woman with white hair and a gaze that found the soft spots without cruelty, listened like someone who measured twice and cut once. She asked about contingency plans. He slid across a folder. Doc named guardian should anything happen to him. A trust set up with Torres's help. A letter to Grace to be opened when she turned 18, telling her exactly why he'd fought and exactly what he hoped she'd forgive. Her gavel fell soft as rain. Petition granted, she said. Mr. Dalton, the law calls it adoption. You may call it what it is. On the drive home, the sky broke. Not a storm, nothing violent, just a slow, soaking rain that found the cracks and took its time. Cottonwood Creek woke with a start, then laughed its way over stones it hadn't seen in months. The ground lifted its head. The live oaks shivered like horses after a long ride. They stopped by the hollow oak before they reached the house. Wes held Grace close and let fat drops dimple her blanket. Doc stood beside him with an umbrella he never opened. Maude nosed the tree with a seriousness that bordered on reverence, then bumped the car seat as if taking inventory. This is where you started, Wes told Grace, but it isn't where you end. At home, he hung the St. Christopher medal on a small nail above the cradle. He set Sarah's lullaby book on the nightstand. He eased into the chair and sang, off-key but faithful. Grace studied his mouth with the grave concentration of a scholar, then gave him a smile so sudden it felt like a door opening in his chest. Life settled into its stubborn, generous rhythms. There were night feedings and neighbor visits, court follow-ups and paperwork with too many boxes. There were hands to shake at the diner and a quiet nod from Wade across the pew some Sundays. There were days when grief came anyway, Emma in a flash of sunlight, Sarah in the creak of the back step, and he let it. He learned that mourning and joy weren't opposite shores. They were currents in the same river, and he could float between them without drowning. They rebuilt the barn slower the second time, on purpose. Every beam got a story. Every nail got a name. Wes carved a small heart into the new lintel, the way his grandfather had carved them into the cradle, and felt something old travel forward into something new without breaking. When Grace turned 6 months, Doc measured her against the kitchen doorframe and penciled the date with a flourish. When she turned 1, the yard filled with mismatched chairs and a cake Marge insisted on making, and a donkey wearing a ribbon she tolerated for exactly the length of one photograph. Serena's letter arrived through a channel Torres had arranged. No return address, just a careful hand and a pressed wildflower taped to the corner. Wes read it aloud in the quiet after everyone left, then tucked it in the lullaby book under a page that began, "Hush now. Little darling." He took off his wedding band one evening, not because Sarah was gone, but because Sarah was here, because love had multiplied the way rain multiplies a creek. He slid the ring on a chain with the medal and hung both above the cradle, a small, humble altar to the 2 women who made him a father twice. Sometimes, when the wind came down off the hills just right, Maude would amble to the fence and bray at the line of trees until Grace squealed and brayed back with a toddler's perfect lack of self-consciousness. Wes would stand in the doorway, coffee cooling in his hand, and watch them both, old bones and new knees. The world making room again for what he'd believed was finished. He didn't pretend to understand how it all worked. He only knew this. Once, he'd walked his fence lines because the edges were all he trusted. Now mornings found him in the middle, on a rug scattered with blocks and burp cloths, reciting a lullaby about bright blue skies, while a little girl beat time on his knee with a wooden spoon. Sometimes broken souls find exactly what they need when they stop looking. And sometimes a hollow oak does what hollows and oaks have done for as long as there's been weather and fear. It makes a space big enough to hide a life until somebody brave enough, stubborn enough, loving enough comes along to carry it home.